296 about the splitting of S2. We know that the heart sound is basically loop doop. This is how it sounds. So the loop represents the S1 and the doop, of course, is the S2. So we know that the S1 means, well, let me use the same color. The S1 means the closure of the mitral in the tricuspid valve. Okay, so the mitral plus tricuspid valve, whenever they close, they produce the S1 sound, while the S2 is produced by the aortic and pulmonic valves. So when they close, they produce the S2. So if we take a look at the heart, so in the red color, here's the mitral valve, and here is the tricuspid valve. So this is tricuspid, this is mitral, and whenever they close, they close at the same time, so they both produce the S1 at the same time. While in purple color over here, here's the aortic valve. So whenever it closes, that's aortic valve. And we have the pulmonic valve, and whenever these two close, they produce the S2 sound together. So if we go up, there's physiological splitting. So what is happening is that during inspiration, there's a drop in the intrathoracic pressure, leading to increased venous return. So what is happening when someone takes a breath inside, like we are breathing, so now the diaphragm goes down in order to let the lungs fill with oxygen. So that the drop down of the diaphragm there, that means there is a decrease in the intrathoracic pressure because we are letting air come into our chest, which means there is an increase in the venous return to the right atrium. So this is right atrium, this is, oh wow, this is left, oh my, ya Allah, this is right ventricle, this is left atrium, this is left ventricle, okay? So that means if we are breathing, if we are inspiring, if we are doing the inspiration process, that means we are decreasing the intrathoracic blood pressure, pressure generally, not blood pressure. That means there is a more cardiac return, like there is no more venous return to the myocardium from the from this circulation through the inferior and superior vena cava, and mainly through the superior vena cava, because there is no if you imagine it, then the heart lies within the intrathoracic cavity, so if there's a decreased pressure around the heart, that means it's easier now for the blood to go into the heart, like there's no pressure compressing the heart, there is no pressure compressing the superior vena cava, so it's easier for blood to go back into the right atrium. So number one, we have more blood coming into the right atrium, okay? So that's step one. That means, of course, there is more venous return, more blood going into the right atrium, then there is increased right ventricular filling. So there you go, because right atrium now has much more blood than it does usually during aspiration. I mean, because it has a lot of venous return coming back to it, filling the right atrium. Then, of course, it will allow this to flow through the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle, because eventually it fills the right ventricle. That means the right ventricle by itself is going to have more blood coming in from the right atrium. Now we have much more blood than expected. Then that's during inspiration, okay? Then, of course, we know that the right atrium should push the blood through the pulmonic valve to go into the pulmonic artery, okay? So what happens here is that there is an increase in right ventricular stroke volume. That means the amount of blood that leaves the right ventricle, and that is true. And there is increase in right ventricular ejection time, so there is delayed closure of the pulmonic valve. So what is happening here, because the right ventricle is having more blood coming in to it from the right atrium that already had a lot of blood coming into it by itself, that means now the right ventricle has much more blood to push through the pulmonic artery. So now, because we have so much blood within here, within right ventricle, that means all of this blood needs to leave and go through the pulmonic artery, which means that this nice valve that we have over here is gonna have to wait and not close fast. It just needs to wait longer for for it to allow the blood to flow through it to the aortic to the pulmonic artery. So basically, we are forcing this uh, valve to stay open for a longer time, which means it will just delay when we compare it to its brother. We know that the aortic, both the tricuspid, this is the one, the tricuspid, and the aortic, they both produce the um, uh, S2 sound. So if the time that this tricuspid valve needs to close is longer than the aortic valve over here, that means this valve is delayed when it comes to closure. This valve takes more time than the aortic valve, which means the tricuspid valves, it closes after the aortic. This is the aortic valve closes. Okay. So that's why what we have here. So and of course we have decrease in pulmonary impedance, and there is an increased capacity, which means also the increase of capacity of the pulmonary circulation, which means now that we have more blood going into the pulmonary circulation. So there is a decrease. There is an increase in the capacity of the lung because it's having much more blood now, more blood going into it, thanks to the inspiration, to take in breath and decrease in the intrathoracic pressure. So if we take a look at this image, so E is expiration and I is the inspiration, okay? So for S1, we know that it's the closure of mitral valve and the tricuspid valve, and it's fine and nice, and there is no splitting at all. But when it comes during inspiration, it comes to before inspiration. Let's just take a look at this. A2 means the closure of the aortic valve, and P2 means the closure of the pulmonic valve. So when we put this one next to this one, we have the end result that is the S2, okay? So what happens is that there is a normal delay during inspiration between these two, because what's happening is that the aortic valve closes at the normal expected time and it's fine, while the pulmonic valve stays longer open, so it delays, it takes a little bit more time for it to close. That's why we see this time difference between these two valves. They don't just close at the same time, or not even close as in expiration. They take longer space between them. So this P2 is the time that the pulmonic valve needs to close, which is delayed from the aortic valve. Okay. So that's for physiological splitting. That's completely normal and it happens in all human beings and it's fine. When it comes to white splitting, this is something that we usually see in conditions that delay right ventricular emptying, just like pulmonary stenosis or right bundle branch block. So this causes delayed pulmonic sound, especially on inspiration, of course, and an exaggeration of normal splitting. So let's take a look over here again. So let me clear up this mess. So now we have a diseased condition, we have a problem that is delaying this. So we know that this is the right ventricle, this is the right atrium, this is the left atrium, and this is left ventricle. So now we have a problematic condition that is delaying the emptying of the right ventricle into the pulmonic artery, just like what we have. We have pulmonic stenosis. So let's say that we have a problem with the pulmonic valve. So it is stenote, so it is stiff and it has a smaller opening. So it's really hard for the right ventricle to push through the tricuspid valve, the stenotic tricuspid valve, I mean pulmonic valve. This is the pulmonic, okay? Pulmonic. This is the pulmonic. So now it's really hard and tough for the right ventricle to push through the stenotic pulmonic valve. So what happens, that means this is delaying the emptying of the blood from the right ventricle into the pulmonic artery. So there is a delay because it's not wide open, it's just really stiff and really stenosed. So that's delaying the emptying into the pulmonic artery. So blood stays in the right ventricle longer, and also the opening of the pulmonic valve stays longer. So it stays open for a longer time because it takes much more time for the blood to come out of it. Okay, so that's for condition number one. For condition number two, let's say that we have right bundle branch block. So we know that we have the SA node over here that's responsible for the electricity of the heart, and then it has a lot of branches. One include, okay, let's say this, and one include going to the left ventricle, the other one goes to the right ventricle. So let's say we have a right bundle branch block, so a problem comes up with this branch, and that means the electricity that comes to the left, to the right ventricle is less than expected. So the right ventricle is weaker now, and it's not capable of pushing as it used to. So that means the pushing of the right ventricle into the pulmonic valve is reduced. So we need now more time for the right ventricle to empty itself into the pulmonic valve, and that means the pulmonic valve has to stay open for a longer period than expected. And of course, it stays open longer than the aortic needs time, okay? So if we take a look over here, this is during expiration. Inspiration for the S1, that is the aortic and, sorry, that's the tricuspid and mitral, and it's fine, completely normal and fine. For A2, that is the closure of the aortic, so it produces S2 sound, and it's fine and normal because the capability of the left ventricle and the amount of blood that is leaving is fine. So, but when what we have is that there is an abnormal delay. It happens during expiration, inspiration, because now we need more time for the pulmonary valve to close because the emptying is delayed. It takes more time to empty the right ventricle. So during expiration, that the amount of delay is this much, let's say, but during inspiration, we have two reasons why it's bigger. First, because we have the delayed emptying in addition to the reduction in the thoracic pressure that we said due to inspiration. So during expiration, there is only the diseased condition that we have, just like pulmonary stenosis, just like right bundle branch block. But during inspiration, we have this problem in addition to the normal condition of the delay due to inspiration, that is due to a decrease in the intrathoracic pressure. So that's for the white splitting. For the white splitting, this is something that we see in congenital heart disease. If we have an ASD, that is atrial septal defect, so we are having a problem between these two, okay, atria. So in the atrial wall, there is an opening. We should not have it here. So let's suppose there is this septal, this septum is below and not showing you this image, but there's an opening, and we know the openings in adults lead for blood passing from areas of high blood pressure into the lower blood pressure, and we know that the left side of the heart has higher pressure, of course. So left to the right over here, and that is because the right side of the heart has a lower pressure. So what it says is that this is heard, the fixed splitting is heard in the ASD, that is atrial septal defect. We have left-right shunt. So we have increased right atrial and right ventricular volumes that leads to increased flow through the pulmonic valve, so delayed pulmonic valve closure, but that is independent of respiration. So let's make it clear that this septal defect, this opening between these two atria, is always there. Like whether it's inspiration, whether it's expiration, it's always there. And it's always passing blood from the left atrium into the right atrium. And that is abnormal. We know that this is abnormal, but also in the normal conditions, the right atrium is getting blood from the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava over here. So the right atrium now gets blood, much more blood, because it gets blood from the normal pathway and also the abnormal pathway. So now the right atrium has much more blood than usual. And of course, that blood goes into the right ventricle. Now the right ventricle has much more blood than usual. And of course, the right ventricle needs to empty that into the pulmonic artery. So it empties itself through the pulmonic valve. That means because we have so much blood coming out of the right ventricle, so much needs to go out. That means this um, um, uh, valve, that is the pulmonic valve, needs to stay open for a longer period in order to allow this all of this blood to go out of it. So it needs to stay open for a longer period. If we compare it, of course, to the aortic valve, that is quite normal and doesn't have any increase in the volume of blood. So that's why we see this, or actually we hear this. For the S1, it's normal, as we said. There's no splitting. That is the mitral and tricuspid closure. For the A2 as well, that is the aortic closure. It's fine. But because the opening, that is the atrial septal defect, we said it's there whether it's congenital defect. So it's there whether it's inspiration, there's expiration, there's always a blood passing from the left atrium into the right atrium. So there is a fixed splitting between these two sounds, because the pulmonic valve needs more time to close, and that doesn't have to do anything with inspiration or expiration. There is always this time difference between these two, and that's it. For the paradoxical splitting, this is heard in conditions that delay aortic valve closure. Okay, this time we are talking about the aortic valve closure. So we have something that makes the aortic valve stays open for a longer period, just like aortic stenosis or left bundle branch block. Okay, so the normal order of semilunar valve closure is reversed. In paradoxical splitting, P2 occurs before A2, and on inspiration, P2 closes later and moves closer to P2. As the paradoxically eliminating the split, on expiration, the split can be heard opposite to physiological splitting. So what is happening is the same as we talked about, but it's a difference in the place. There's a difference in the place, actually. So we have wow, this is the left atrium, this is the left ventricle, this is the right atrium, this is the right ventricle, okay? So this time we are having a condition that delays. Okay, do you have examples here? Yes, aortic stenosis or left bundle branch block. So let's say now this time we have a problem with this valve, the aortic valve. This time it's stenosed. So if it's stenosed, that means it's really hard for the left ventricle to push blood through it into the aorta and then into the systemic circulation, okay? So it's really hard because this valve, the aortic valve this time, is stenosed, which means the emptying is going to take longer time, okay? So because it's longer time, that means this aortic valve is going to close later than its brother, that is the pulmonic valve. So it takes longer time for it to close. So now the delay is in the aortic valve, not in the pulmonary valve as we usually see. So because we are having a condition with the with the aortic valve over here. Another condition, another example is, let's say that we have this. We know that this is the SA node, and it produces the electricity of the heart. And then there you go. It have two branches, one to the right, one to the left. Eventually, let's say that we are having a problem that is the left bundle branch block. So we started to have left bundle branch block. So we're blocking the electricity to the left side of the heart. That means the left side of the heart is losing its capability to contract as much as it did, and it's becoming weak. So it takes longer and takes more time for it to do its function and push through the pulmonic through the aortic valve, whether it was normal or stenosis. Let's say this time it's a normal, completely normal aortic valve, but the problem is with the left ventricle itself. It takes so much time for it to be able to push the blood out of it. Okay, so that means there is this valve, this unfortunate valve, the aortic valve needs to stay, even though it's normal, it just needs to stay open for a longer time. So what we see, or actually what we hear, well, we know first is that the S1, that is the mitral and tricuspid, and it's normal, it's fine. What we see this time is that the aortic valve closure occurs after the pulmonary valve closure. This is not something that we usually see. We always have seen the aortic artery, the aortic valve closes before the pulmonary valve, but this time it's different. So during expiration, if we take a look during expiration, so there is this difference between those, and that is because the aortic valve is delayed. It takes longer to close, okay? So it takes longer to close than the pulmonic valve. So that's why we see. But what happens, this is during expiration, okay? During inspiration, the aortic artery, the aortic valve still takes longer to close, so it's not changing. I mean, the condition, the problem is still there, so it still has to close at the same time, so it's still has to close later than the pulmonic valve. So it's abnormal, but I mean, it does not change. It's still, the problem is still there. So what happens is that we know there is an expected delay of the pulmonic valve during inspiration, and that is physiologic. Okay, so there is physiologic expected delay in the pulmonic valve closure during the inspiration, and that is due, remember, due to the decrease in, or the drop in the intrathoracic pressure. So that is something that we usually, physiologic splitting, we always see. It's always there. It's always there. So because it's always there, then we should have it over here. But because we are having another abnormal, then it's minimizing, by luck, minimizing the abnormal state. Okay, and that should be fine. Okay.